But oftentimes they bed on very open looking hillsides. And we have a lot of what I call like little thumbnails that are off the side of the hill. It'll just be a little depression in the side of the hill. I actually got some pictures this last week of a couple bucks doing that. They almost use the terrain. Sometimes they'll bed right off that steep stuff, and it's like they use that as their cover.
What are
So
you then doing to try to determine where he is bedding? Are you just looking at like a 200-yard radius around that piece of sign that tells you there's a buck there, or what does your process look like for that?
yeah, I mean, if I start getting him on camera, the number one thing I'm looking for is daytime pictures. I mean that begins to tell you where you need to. If you're not getting daytime pictures of him, you're probably not on him yet. And I mean, I've done this plenty of times. Maybe I start getting a picture of a buck. This just happened the other day. I just got a buck on camera the other day that was there last year, and I was like, I hadn't gotten him all summer. Well, I just got one picture of him on the 19th of August, but it was in the middle of the night. It was like 12 a.m. or 1 a.m., something like that. Well, what I'm going to do is I just need to shift down, I think, a couple hundred yards and see where he's at. Because oftentimes that's all it is. You might get a nighttime picture, but you might only have to shift one way or the other a couple hundred yards, and all of a sudden, boom, he's all over those cameras. It can be that precise sometimes when you're doing this. So if you're finding him and you're getting nighttime pictures, he's probably not far. Just cluster your cameras, go to each side of where you got that picture and start looking for trails or bedding or things like that. And that's how I kind of start to define one that I'm close. Because obviously, if you're getting daytime pictures, he's not going too far. I mean, that's how this buck here. That's how I killed him. I had cameras set up and was catching him higher on the mountain. It was be like 3, 4 in the morning. He's feeding on the oats. I literally moved the camera probably 150 yards down the mountain and found a gap through some rocks. I go and I pulled that camera 2 days before I killed him and had him on there 3 times in the daytime. And we're talking 150 yards down the mountain. And actually, I had him. I just went back and looked at these pictures, but I had him at like 4 in the morning, and then I had him on up high, and then I went and checked that camera down low, and I had him at like 7 or 8 a.m. So he had moved just down the hill, but he was in daylight down the mountain. He wasn't on daylight up the mountain. So that just shows you how little it takes to just be on them. And I mean, I had 3 daytime pictures of him in that week leading up to me killing him. And that's where I said, I need to be there on that level to kill him because he's obviously comfortable in daylight right there. He's not daylighting up higher because there's roads and stuff that run higher and pressure and stuff. So I think he just would stay off of it. But just dropping 200 yards sometimes is all it takes early in the season. Honestly, is not big, huge shifts a lot of times. And as far as looking for bedding, I mean, every area is a little bit different, but a lot of times, these bucks aren't bedding in giant thickets where I'm at. I hear that talked about in other mountainous regions that have clear cuts and stuff like that. Some areas I hunt just do not have that. Honestly, I find that they like to, if you get a ridge that's rolling off, they're going to bed right there where they can watch down below them, whether that's into a creek bottom. There could be little benches going up the mountain, and they could be at various levels sometimes. One buck that I was just going and checking there last week, I had him down in a creek bottom. I went up on the ridge, only a couple hundred yards, and boom, there's 3, 4 beds. There's multiple bucks in there, but I just made a big sweep and was trying to find, okay, where could they potentially be bedding? So if I go in to hunt this deer, I'm going to know kind of where that's at. But oftentimes they bed on very open looking hillsides. And we have a lot of what I call like little thumbnails that are off the side of the hill. It'll just be a little depression in the side of the hill. I actually got some pictures this last week of a couple bucks doing that. They almost use the terrain. Sometimes they'll bed right off that steep stuff, and it's like they use that as their cover. They'll lay in that little flat and use that steeper stuff behind them as their cover. It might not be super thick, but sometimes if it's down a little bit off the hilltop, it might be super rocky behind them and stuff like that. I think they use that for the hearing aspect and sight aspect. Nothing, you try to walk down on top of them, it's not happening quietly. So I think, deer obviously adapt to where they're at. And if they don't have thick, super thick areas, they won't use it. But another thing they will use, and I did find some beds the other day in something like this, is there'll be like these patches of trees they're more open underneath, but they offer shade. So I think if it does get warm, they like to get up under there, even though it might be on the sunny side of the mountain. A lot of people talk about getting on that north side or the cooler sides of the mountain. Well, we don't have a whole lot of north sides because our stuff runs north to south, our ridges do. So we have east-west sides. So sometimes they have to improvise, and you just got to look for that dark canopy. I think one of your guests mentioned that the other day about looking for that dark cover. That is definitely something to look for, especially if it turns warmer in September. I think they're going to try to get into that stuff and use the shade and the cooler winds and stuff. I see that they tend to go higher this time of year too. I think as the winds start to pick up and it gets a little cooler, it's like they use that wind. I mean, you all have been in the mountains, you get up a little higher and that wind starts blowing on you. It feels a little better than being down in the bottom. Maybe it's not moving as much. So yeah, those are just things I look for in my area to try to key in on them.
Chad, I want to ask too. This is because of when this is airing. A lot of what you're talking about is going to be able to, like, listeners are going to be able to take it here in the next week or two and go and start applying it. And I know that you've got a lot of history in your area and you've got historical trail cam data. But let's say you had a busy summer and you weren't able to really get your trail cameras out or anything, and you're just now really getting geared up. Based on your past experiences, what are you going and looking for right now to locate a buck? Let's say you're starting from scratch. Are you going and trying to find oaks that are dropping and putting cameras on those? Are you putting cameras on those trails that you mentioned, finding those big ancient trails that are cut to the side of the hill? What are the main things that you're going to focus on to put cameras on to start locating these bucks to hunt throughout the month of September?
Yeah, I would probably do the whole long linear thing, whether that's a creek, a ridge top, something like that. Probably would focus a lot around creeks right now because it's been so dry in a lot of areas that, now we've got a lot of rain here lately, but, when you have a dry summer, a lot of those deer might be down around the creeks and stuff like that. The vegetation may be better down there because it's been dry this summer. That's probably what I would do. I'd get along creeks, look for crossings. If you find good ones, drop cameras. If I had 10 cameras, I'd probably drop, 7 or 8 of them for sure along that to start. And then, maybe follow those trails up, see if you can find bedding within reasonable distance of them. Look for your oaks also. Find the elevation that they're dropping, whether it's high, middle, low, or a combination of all of it, Most of ours have been high that I can tell so far. But I have found some that are low down around the creeks. I assume that they just got more moisture this summer and are producing some, but that's not everywhere. So yeah, I would kind of do a combination of that, and I would probably be checking those cameras every week right now. Put them out for 5, 6, 7 days. Go back in, see what you got. If you've got bucks that you want to target, then start clustering those cameras out from that. Look for those trails leading to whatever food source may be, or and I try to check both. If I find those beds, I'm going to go above them, try to see if there's any food sources above that they could be coming to. Go below, is there water, is there food? Just try to make that determination where they're at and what they're doing.
Now,
I would just say this too: if a guy's just getting started, I wouldn't get my expectations too high to start. You know, as far as a specific buck, I would just focus a little bit more on finding a good deer and then go from there.
I gotta ask about this. You're saying go and check the cameras every week. You're saying if you find that bedding area, you're going to go below it. You're basically going to walk around it and try to find food sources within a reasonable distance of that. What are your thoughts on just putting pressure on the deer by doing that? Are you kind of tiptoeing around? Are you trying to be really careful about that, or just what are your thoughts about potentially bumping those deer and kind of boogering up the spot?
You do have to be smart about it. You know, I mean, if I have a good idea of where that deer might be bedding, I'm obviously not going to. I might take one trip like I did the other day to locate that. I'm not going to keep going back in there and busting them out every time. So I'm going to probably try to put my cameras more on the edge of those trails where I think I can get to them and check them reasonably. Yeah, I had a spot the other day that I just felt like how am I going to get here to check this camera without boogering up deer if they're bedding in here? So I didn't put one there because you do have to be a little bit mindful of that. But at the same time, I feel like they tolerate a little bit more this time of year. I mean, they haven't been hunted all year, so you know it depends on your area. If you got, we have a lot of hikers and stuff that go through our area and hike trails and stuff like that. So you have to kind of look at that. You know, how much human presence are they used to in a given time? I mean, if you're hunting really remote mountains and trying to do this stuff, it might be a little bit different. You know, you might not want to put as much pressure, but if you're just going in and you're trying to find stuff now, you've got to have the information or you're not going to be on them. So it's kind of that balance of I have to have enough information, but not enough that I'm pushing the deer out. So it kind of is a tightrope walk when you're doing some of that for sure.